Show and start.
So am I audible and screen visible to everybody?
Yes.
So the next 45 minutes, I have tried to summarize and probably make pearls out of what is newborn screening to the best of my ability. So let's begin. So the need of the hour, as per the topic mentioned, is probably newborn screening. So why so it is? Let us see why is it so in the next course of our presentation. So what do we actually need to know, and what am I going to be speaking about is what is newborn screening, why is it so important, when is it to be done, and how to go about it. So as this picture reads by itself, everything begins with a necessity, and necessity has always been the mother of discovery. So way back in 1963, it was Robert Guthrie who was the father of newborn screening. He made a very innovative concept of identifying a way to identify the most precious children getting mentally retarded to be prevented. It was phenylketonuria, and it began with Guthrie's heel prick newborn screening test. Sadly, it began with his second child who was actually mentally retarded, but it has gone leaps and bounds and saved many billions of children all around the world. So this was a very primitive method. It was a bacterial inhibition, but then now through the years we have seen a lot of evolution in newborn screening. So what is generally a newborn screening? Newborn screening is something which is a public health initiative that aims to early identify and efficiently manage a very important genetic and metabolic endocrine disorders, which will also contribute to reduction significantly in the mortality and morbidity. So it is a comprehensive system. So in any ideal situation, it aims in universal coverage for all newborns. So it's basically the most effective preventive pediatric public health initiative, which is now done worldwide. So what is the rationale? Just as we are talking about 50 decades beyond this invention, this stays good even today. This was a concept which was given by Jugner et al. In 1968, where they identified what is exactly a disease which needs to be screened. And this slide says the same. So any disease is said to be an important health problem if it should, and it has the following characteristics. So the objectives of the screening should include a defined period of outset. There should be a defined target population. There should be a scientific evidence, and there should be an integrated education, testing, and clinical services. And it should ensure quality assurance, and the program should have informed choice. It is never forced, and the program promotes equity and access to all the screening of entire target population, and the benefits the entire community. So based on these principles, well, let us see what is the current scenario and how has it evolved. So in 1960s to 21, where are we? From bacterial inhibition assay, we have gone down to fluorometric test. And then we have the most famous, initially it was isotope mass spectrometry. Now we have the tandem mass spectrometry with super added liquid gas chromatography. And now we are in the phase of next generation sequencing through genetics. So what do we need to know as clinicians? Let us see what is the focus or what is the burden of this disease globally. About 140 million children are born all around the world. And of them, we know at least 25-30% have some kind of metabolic disease, which includes screenable and non-screenable ones. And this includes the population who are in consanguinity too. So this accounts to about 5 to 15% of the sick neonates who will be entering into NICU, and they would be requiring a screening for metabolic disease so that they can be identified whether the disease is permanent or transient or curable or not. So this is why we are talking about it today. Having said worldwide, what is the burden in India? So nearly 25 million babies are born in India today, annually, as of today, and about 800,000 have congenital malformations, of them 25,000 metabolic diseases, 350 with say G6PD, and about 15,000 have congenital hypothyroidism. This is the latest ICMR statistics. So this was basically concluded that a pilot newborn screening, which was done way back in 1999 initially, and thereafter once more in 2018, they identified the prevalence of the diseases. Amongst them, they identified congenital hypothyroidism, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, G6PD deficiency, biotinidase deficiency, galactosemia, and cystic fibrosis. Amongst them, galactosemia and cystic fibrosis are emerging diseases even in Indian population. So among the top to all, top of all is CH, congenital hypothyroidism. This is followed by CAH and G6PD deficiency. So to add on, even amino acidopathies and urea cycle disorders and other group of metabolic diseases are emerging in literature, and there are reports even in Indian scenario and context. So what do we do now? What do we actually mean by a newborn screen which is universal? So a focus of this talk will be something which is targeting the normal and then the high risk population. So basically, what is recommended as a universal screening program in India by national NRHM and other government initiatives is, it includes a metabolic screen, a hearing screen, a universal eye screen, a cranial ultrasound, a screening for critical congenital heart diseases, and DDH. So this is just the essentials that necessarily need to be done to any newborn who is born and who is in the nursed both in the intramural and the extramural unit. So what is our priority? So the current recommendation will begin with metabolic screening. The current recommendation is that based on this data from various research projects and ICMR projects, and based on the availability of expertise, cost involved, and the necessity, we have categorized a group of diseases and core diseases which have to be necessarily screened. As I've already mentioned, this includes congenital hypothyroidism, CAH, G6PD, and hearing screening as well. So, and galactosemia and biotinase and CF are recently emerging. There is also certain pockets of India where hemoglobinopathies, not to forget, are very prevalent, and they should also be used, necessarily screened in those pockets. There is another expanded screening, which is not mandatory, and this is only necessarily needs to be done whenever there is a high-risk newborn where there is expertise and care and necessity. So we begin with always a counseling, as in any other test. What is the essentials of pre-screening counseling? So we need to have a documented patient information leaflet and an informed consent from every parent, both mother and father, before we attempt to do the newborn screening. We have to clearly explain to them that the newborn screening is a preventive measure and is focused only to identify certain preventable, common prevalent metabolic conditions. It is always preferable, as in any other neonatal condition, to begin the counseling in the antenatal period. It's also essential to inform them that it has to be mandatory even in asymptomatic and healthy newborns. We need to explain the cost involved. We need to explain the entire procedure and an average turnaround time that it takes for the test to be informed. We should also explain to them that it may require further testing and it may not correlate phenotypically and may also be life-saving in some diseases. So once we've gone through this checklist and the parent has been counseled essentially and we have got the consent, then we go ahead with the timing of the testing. So what is essentially the correct ideal timing, as we all know, is between 72 hours to 7 days of life. So this is because it reduces the rate of false negativity in IEM and false positivity in congenital hypothyroidism CAH. As we all know, by normal physiology, only when the baby begins to feed well, its hepatic and renal functions are stabilized, and they initially surge to some measurements of TSH are mostly often after pregnancy, delivery, and 17-OHP, all of this is taken care of. This surge is prevented, and 72 hours is ideal period wherein we can do the testing to identify these diseases. So these indications for a mandated second sample are those babies who are screened early, especially preterm neonates, babies who are low birth weight, and babies who have not yet touched 1,500 grams. It is prudent to do necessarily the test in preterm babies at about 34 weeks and once they reach 1,500 grams. So if in case the baby has been sick and has received a blood transfusion, it will be ideal to wait for 6 to 8 weeks before we could do the test. If it warrants or mandates earlier test, it could be done at 3 days still and could be repeated at 6 to 8 weeks if there is any ambiguity in the test. So how is the sampling done? So as we all know, it's an age-old method of heel prick sampling for NBS. So this heel prick is usually done with a special lancet and it only pierces a very tiny portion, about 2.4 millimeters of the specified depth. In our experience, most often babies, if they are left comfortable on mother's shoulder and the flow of blood is more easy through that, in that position, we can easily comfort the baby too. The heel prick is less painful at this position. Depending on the number of disorders to be screened, usually we go for either 3 to 5 drops of blood are collected. So once it is collected, next it mandates whether the sample is a good sample. There are few characteristics that are essential to know that the sample is good. The blood drop should soak the filter paper on both the sides without touching the skin. There should not be any contact. The blood should not be layered. The whole circle of the filter paper should be covered. The sample collected should be dried at room temperature in a horizontal position in a clean and a dry place, and specially designed stands can also be used for this. After drying, the NBS cards are put in an envelope and they are with a desiccator and sealed in a zipped bag. So these cards can be stored in very rare scenarios if the baby has probably expired or there are select situations wherein it cannot be processed. It can be stored at -20 degrees for even up to years, and this may help us to identify any prenatal issues in the next subsequent pregnancy. So we also need to remember that it is performed even in sick babies and premature babies, but it needs to be repeated if there is any ambiguity. And in infants are not screened before 24 hours. If there is any doubts, we can screen later too. And gestational age of the birth and the birth weight should always be documented along with these samples, and as most of these reports are based on gestational age and birth weight. So narrating the entire course of biochemical tests may be difficult. We are just taking a sneak peek into the biochemical tests that were available and are available. We generally use the dried filter paper test, where this is what we have explained as a heel prick method. The initial type of spectrometry that was used was isotope induced, where these metabolites were ionized and they were identified by specified screening probes. And now we move on to tandem mass spectrometry and gas chromatography, wherein they are ionized and they go through the process where they are fragmented and they are identified. So this is a reasonably second-tier investigation, which is most often seen in some of the nursing homes and private hospitals and in government sector too nowadays. So we also will have a small look into what is actually going to be the future. So a lot of science has evolved both into metabolics and in unidentified disorders. So we have next-gen sequencing coming up even for diagnosis of metabolic diseases. So the ACMG, American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics, have identified and categorized these disorders into 3 groups. A core panel, which includes about 29 diseases, and a secondary target panel, which includes about 25 disorders, and not so appropriate the rest. So this panel will identify, depending on the nature and the phenotype of the presentation, we can subject them to the necessary NGS. So the DNA is extracted, sequenced, prepared, analyzed, and identified for the particular focus of that particular gene, which is responsible for the metabolic disorder. So this is very, it may be too accurate, but the turnover time is quite significant. It's quite long. The new other 2 evolving concepts not yet put into much of practice, but are promising are capillary electrophoresis mass spectrometry and metabolomic profiling. The word metabolomics means similar to genomics. It deals with proteins and metabolites, so which are the main culprits in various metabolic screening. So this capillary electrophoresis mass spectrometry is a newer technology where ions are being used in the spectrometry. This is specifically useful in especially cystic fibrosis, but it's not yet put into vogue and it's still under research phase. So what are the current recommendations? So the NNF guidelines and the National Health Mission guidelines have identified and categorized of infants to 3 categories, A, B, and C. Category A are the group of neonates, and all neonates who are born in India have to undergo this mandatory screening, and this is called as routine newborn screening. The second category is the screening that is done only in the high-risk population, and it's called as a high-risk newborn screen. And the third is screening done in resource-rich settings, and it is also called as the expanded newborn screening. So let us see what is this risk tier for. So as we've already mentioned, the most prevalent are the essential. So congenital hypothyroidism, CAH, G6PD are routine recommendations and should be definitely screened for all neonates born in our country. The following disorders with high risk population, wherein we mean that the babies who are born to mothers who have consanguinity, who have had previous unexplained sibling deaths, who have had IEM in the past, in the suggestive of IEM history in the past, currently very critically ill neonates who have unexplainable physiology, children with symptoms and signs that are specifically characteristic of specific IgMs. There is history of consanguinity. In this group of babies who have been identified as high risk, we need to do this following TMS test to identify the disorders. Amongst them, we see galactosemia and cystic fibrosis and biotinase deficiency, and mainly urea cycle disorders are emerging even in our scenario. As already mentioned, expanded newborn screening are a panel of 30 to 40 inherited IEMs, which are not very often routinely recommended, and they are done only in urban settings to mainly confirm the previous screening tests. So what to do now if we have a screening test is positive? So first of all, the first action that we should do is to confirm whether the child is sick or it is asymptomatic. A sick child, we know, would need immediate hospitalization and a more focused planned care. Then the next step that we should do is a diagnostic test, which should confirm our positive screening test. Genetic counseling is very much essential at this phase, including mapping of carriers in the family to ascertain mode of inheritance. Possible prenatal diagnosis in subsequent pregnancies is also a concern. So just to have a course and view of three major screening disorders that we screen. First is congenital hypothyroidism. So this is slightly a busy slide. So as I've already mentioned, the current prevalence of the disease is especially more so in South Indian population, as per the data from the ICMR, which is concluded in 2012. And the incidence and prevalence of CH in South Indian population is about 1 to 1,172 children. So the Indian Society of Pediatric and Adolescent Endocrinology has formulated a working plan of how to diagnose and how to manage them. So these are the main steps that are involved. Screening should be done for every newborn, either using cord blood, but preferably using postnatal blood, ideally at 48 hours to 72 hours. On this screen sample, these neonates, if found to have a TSH of more than 20 for within the period, should be called for confirmation. They usually will be repeated at a 5-day period. And if the repeat value still continues to be the same, we go for a venous test. If the immediate venous confirmation of the sample is very high, there is no question they have to be treated as congenital hypothyroidism. For a screen of more than TSH of 40 million international units per liter, following immediate confirmation with the TSH, usually they are rescreened at 7 to 10 days of age, and once it is confirmed, we begin the treatment. Venous confirmation in cases where there are levels which are TSH of more than 20 before the age of 2 weeks, or a value of more than 10 after the age of 2 weeks, with a low T4, that is, this is borderline, or a free tour which is normal, may indicate primary congenital hypothyroidism, and the treatment should be initiated. So this is to say, although if the TSH is in borderline, if the T4 is low, we have to begin at 2 weeks of age necessary treatment. Serum free T4 and T4 measured at 2 weeks, and TSH and T4 at 1 month, 2 months, and 6 months, and 3 months till 6 months, from 6 months to 3 years. Every 3 monthly, they need to be monitored, and they should be targeted management and a focused plan for these children. So sick babies who have already been checked once within the first 48 hours necessarily need to be screened a repeat value at 7 days of age. Imaging is recommended once we confirm, and CH is once it is biochemically confirmed. And the current date, we prefer to go for scans. And the treatment of choice is levothyroxine. It is begun at 10 to 15 microgram per kg in the neonatal period. So this is based on the recent consensus and guidelines. So as we all do know, this is the focused flowchart for thyroid screening. Once we get a positive screening on a filter paper with the serum free T4 and TSH, if it is normal, there's no worries. If it is abnormal, then we go ahead with a thyroid scan and we identify whether we are dealing with an ectopic thyroid or absent uptake or a normal one. So then we go for antibodies, and then we see the TBIA measurement. If it is positive, then it is a transient congenital hypothyroidism. If it is negative, we are dealing with synthetic defect. And if it is absent, we are dealing with thyroglobulin synthetic defect. So now thyroid hormone synthetic defect, globulin synthetic defect. So whenever there is absent uptake, it is mandatory that we confirm whether the presence of the gland or the tissue is normal or abnormal with an ultrasound. So this will help us, and next step would be TBIA measurement. And with a positive screen and a negative screen, we try to identify whether it is transient or it is a biosynthetic defect. No thyroid issue, no uptake, and a very low T4 and TSH, high TSH levels would say that the baby has thyroid agenesis. As I already mentioned, ectopic gland can be revealed with the technetium scan. So this is a generally accepted a screening protocol for congenital hypothyroidism. So moving on to the next one, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So we all know it refers to autosomal recessive disorders caused by inherited defects in thyroid biosynthesis. It is most commonly caused by deficiency of 21 alpha hydroxylase, which leads to mineralocorticoid and glucocorticoid excess, mineralocorticoid deficiency and excess of sex steroids. So this disease presentation may be classical as salt wasting or simple virilizing form and a non-classical form. A classical CH is most readily discernible where it presents virilization in girls, but it may be missed in few boys wherein we have to screen them. So this is a standard recommendation for CAH screening. You have to do a routine filter paper test. That is the recommended first tier test. The use of cord blood is not recommended because of high levels soon after delivery. Fluoroimmunoassay has been replaced by radioimmunoassay for the recent NBS screening programs. So as I've already mentioned, we need to take it at 48 to 72 hours. In case of mothers who have received antenatal corticosteroids as part of preterm labor, it would be better if they are retested at 2 weeks or at discharge, whichever is later, and they may interfere with the screening levels of 17-OHP. So this also is confirmed by a 2-tier test. So the initial time you have to do a fluoroimmunoscopy, and then with evaluation of positive tests, you have to confirm with liquid chromatography and TMS. So the use of molecular and genetic tests have been reserved only when there is consanguinity and or when there is any non so classical presentation, or when it is used for a prenatal diagnosis and genetic counseling. So what we have to do to confirm a CAH, you need to do a complete adrenocortical profile to differentiate 21 alpha hydroxylase from other enzyme defects and to diagnose borderline cases. Alternatively, this is a newer concept, steroid profiling can be done on tandem mass, which may also help us to identify a subset of disorders. So this again is a NBS, the screening for CAH flowchart. So as I've already mentioned, we have to do a 2-tier test. First is a dried blood spot, and then we have to go ahead with confirm with a liquid chromatography. And there are values and cutoffs that are specified for term neonates and preterm neonates in the first 48 to 72 hours. So just to highlight what are the common types, we have 11 beta, 17 alpha, and 3 beta. So this is a phenotypically presentation, and I think we are familiar with this. This is an add-on once we confirm the entire panel of the biochemical profile of suspected CAH patients. So next, most common apart from these are G6PD deficiency. So about 3,900 children are born annually in India with this disease, and we know it is male predominant. This can be easily identified by what is called as a modified Foserman ring test, which is simple heel prick. A positive test is identified by the absence of a bluish discoloration in the paper, which is a circumscribed area of less than 5.5 millimeter. So do we know anything about IEM profile in India? Should we routinely screen is an evolving question. This is a recent study which has come up in 2017 where they have stratified high-risk newborn, and to our surprise, we already have a spectrum of this disease in India available. This was mainly done in 6 major centers in various metropolitan cities in India. There is already an organic acidemia spectrum available, and amino acid urea cycle defects spectrum is also available. So it mandates that we also look for IEM screening as a high-risk newborn categories, even in India. So for want of time, I have not elaborated on the rest of the major metabolic screening, which is a talk by itself. Moving on to the next aspect of the newborn screening, which is a universal eye screening. There are 2 aspects into it. One is routine universal eye screening, other one is ROP. So what is universal eye screen? It is done for all of patients who are born in the NICU or any nursery, especially to include preterm and those who have specific family history of eye disorders, and there is visible opacity in ocular media or genetic or neurological disease, or they have specific stigmata of intrauterine infections. So this is on whom we have to screen. Even if we have missed the screening at discharge of these babies, it's essential that we at least screen them at follow-up. Who are those at-risk newborns? Those who are born too soon or born before 36 weeks or birth weight of less than 2 kg, who have had a family member with a poor vision, with a family history of any tumor in the eye, has had any stage of ROP right now or in the newborn period, history of not crying at birth or delayed cry, a stay in the SNCU of more than 4 days, an abnormally looking child who cannot fix, and any birth defect and associated anomalies, or any concern of the parents regarding vision in an older age, and necessarily, if not missed initially, at the time of next discharge. So what are the major red flag signs which may warrant us to do the screening early? Family history of congenital cataracts, retinoblastoma, metabolic or genetic diseases, and other congenital abnormalities such as congenital heart disease, or evidence of intrauterine infection. So it is essential that every clinician knows and does the red reflex. So what are the principles of red reflex? It has to be assessed in a dimly lit room. It can take about 10 seconds for the time and the lights can go down and the people will need some time to go for dilatation. You need to stand at least 2 feet away from the child and look through the direct ophthalmoscope. And if you have spectacles, you need to correct for your refractive error. You have to have a clear focus and you have to use a large enough aperture size so that both eyes including the face are illuminated. So the light is it is displayed over the entire face. Use different angles and make sure that we get the red reflex appropriately. Since the cornea, pupil, anterior chamber, lens, vitreous are all transparent, the retina is visible to the examiner. If there is any obstruction, you could still get an opaque and absent red reflex. So this is the National Health Mission RBSK guidelines for a checklist that we have to essentially do for all neonates. So these are visible and cannot be missed. So we look for eyelids, we look for hemangiomas in the eyelids, droopy eyelids, coloboma, and we look for obvious facial markings like port vein stain. Look for red conjunctiva, which can lead to dreadful ophthalmoneonotarum or sympathetic ophthalmitis, and microphthalmos or megalocornea, a blue sclera, which can indicate congenital glaucoma, colobomas, a corneal opacity of any forms, and they also look for congenital cataract, and as I've already told, absence of white red reflex. So all of this should be necessarily done in any newborn who has been discharged after the initial stay. Now we move on to the most important ROP screening and guidelines. So whom to screen? This screening should be done. This is the latest operational guidelines recommended by the RBSK. So this is universal in India. The screening should be carried out for all infants who are less than 2 kgs, who have been born at the age less than 34, gestation age less than 34 weeks. Any gestational age between 34 to 36 weeks, it will be left to the clinical discretion. If in case the baby has had any important risk factors that has required him to have cardiorespiratory support, a prolonged oxygen therapy, a respiratory distress syndrome, a chronic lung disease, fetal hemorrhage, a blood transfusion, neonatal sepsis, or IVH, or a poor postnatal growth, all of this have important risk factors for ROP. So they have to be necessarily screened at 34 to 36 weeks. Infants who have been having a very stormy course should be screened much earlier than the recommended time. So now when to screen? They should receive their first screening earliest at about 4 weeks of birth. In infants who are born less than 28 weeks or who are very low birth weight and who weigh less than 1.2 kg, they should be ideally screened at about 2 to 3 weeks after delivery at a PMA of 32 weeks. This is the recommendation so that there is no ambiguity between the other laws. Next, we move on to the hearing screen. So who are the ones who actually essentially should have the hearing scheme? Those group of neonates similar to the eye disorders who have had a family history of hereditary childhood hearing disorders, sensorineural hearing impairment, any stigmata of torch infections, craniofacial anomalies, a birth weight of less than 1,500, high peak bilirubin in this neonatal period needing exchange transfusion. There is a history of ototoxic medications, multiple courses of loop diuretics, especially furosemide, bacterial meningitis in the NICU period, an Apgar's cone which has been less than 4 or less than 6 at 5 minutes, a need for prolonged ventilation, and known syndromes. These are the essential high-risk babies who need hearing screen at or before discharge at 1 month of age. Routine mandatory screening has been recommended by the government guidelines for all neonates who are discharged from the NICU. This is also a two-tier procedure. Now the recommendation is to do two-stage screening protocol. That is, we first do the OAE, autoacoustic emissions, and infants who fail the OAE are screened with a BERA. In this two-tier system, the second tier being ABR is more expensive and is more sensitive and diagnostic. And so we need to choose the patients only which is wherein it's practical or viable. So as I've already mentioned, this two-stage OAE first and then ABR is the current recommendation. If it is not feasible, it is essential that is, we send those group of neonates who fail the OAE to be sent to a higher center where ABR is done. This program is should be coordinated with an audiologist, and daily screening may be carried out in hospitals who have more than 200 births. And in hospitals where about 100 to 200 births are expected, we need to do at least twice a week or weekly. So the recommendations are that all of them, once they are identified, they have to be rescreened at 6 weeks and on first immunization if they are missed. If again they're abnormal, ABR has to be done for confirmation, so that even by the age of 1 month of age, they are on an optimal remedy for the identified hearing loss. So that is the purpose behind the hearing screen. So the goal is that the newborn babies before 1 month of age should be ideally screened, diagnosed and identified for a hearing loss, and before 3 months should be started on, and intervention should begin at 6 months of age. Moving on to the next newer recent recommendation, screening for critical congenital heart diseases. So what do we mean by a CCHD screen and why we have to go about this? So this is because about 1 in every 4 babies who are born with a congenital critical heart disease, and they may require surgery even within the first year of life. All neonates who are born after 24 hours are screened, or preferably at discharge, whichever happens later. This CCHD mainly targets 7 major duct-dependent heart lesions, which can be identified on a basic principle of difference in the pulse oximetry readings. So here we place the pulse oximeter on the right upper limb and the left lower limb, and typically the heart defects which are duct dependent may show a hypoxia and low levels of oxygen saturation. So this may not be identified before 24 hours and ideally should be done after 24 hours. We'll go through the algorithm for the screening of CCHD. So this is an algorithm which is recommended all over. Any child who is well at 24 to 48 hours or shortly before discharge, because they may be asymptomatic in the first 3 days because of the transitional circulation. We need to screen, as I've recommended, with a 2-limb pulse oximeter, one in the right upper limb and then in the left foot. So after which, we have to essentially evaluate the reports. If there is a saturation of less than 90% in the right hand, then what we have to do is to recheck after 1 hour. And if it's still less than 90% in the right hand, then we have to again recheck after 1 hour. And if it necessarily it's less, if the saturations all between the right hand and the foot are either less than 90%, then it says the saturations are less, baby is hypoxemic, which can indicate that the baby is going to turn into a critical congenital heart disease. It satisfies for a positive screen, which means the baby has to be formally evaluated with a diagnostic echo. Coming on to the yellow zone, wherein coming on to the green zone, which is much easier, whenever we find the saturations more than 95% in the right hand or the foot, or when the difference between the pulse oximeter readings, the right upper limb and the lower foot are less than 3%, or we repeat the screening after 1. After which, if you find that the readings are still more and continue to remain the same, then they all tally for a negative screen. So essentially, any saturation reading at close to 95 to 97% in the left foot always most often rules out critical congenital heart disease. Having said that, there are a few conditions which can be missed, and we need to evaluate at 7 days of age also. but most often it is 86% sensitive and can be used. Coming to the yellow zone is the most confusing aspect. Here we have a saturation reading which is between 90 to 95 in the right hand or the foot, and there is a greater than 3% difference in the foot. So this again says that something is wrong. So we do the repeat screen after 1 hour and we do recheck after 1 hour. So although the saturations has been between 90 to 95, if the difference between the right upper limb and the left foot still remain to be significantly different of more than 3%, we still take them as positive screen, and these group of neonates also have to be admitted and evaluated with a formal echocardiography to confirm or rule out critical congenital heart diseases. So this is routinely recommended for all neonates now who have been discharged from the nursery. So we need to ensure that these infants are quite relatively, preferably alert, and the pulse oximetry should be properly applied, and the documentation of the result should also be proper, and the parents should be informed. Moving on to the next screening tool that we need to do is the developmental dysplasia of the hip. This we are familiar. So this is routinely done and sometimes most often missed nowadays. So Barlow's test and Otterley test are the age-old concepts that we do to identify DDH. So in Barlow's test, we have to look for a positive test by flexing and adducting the hips and applying little pressure on the knee with a direct force posteriorly. We look for femoral head dislocation posterior from the acetabulum, and dislocation is palpable as the head slips, as the head of the femur slips out of the acetabulum. So this is confirmatory of the Otterley, wherein in Barlow, an Otterley test is the hips are examined one at a time and they are flexed and the baby is abducted. So that's the difference between the, and Barlow it is adduction and Otterley is abduction. So both the tests are done to identify developmental dysplasia of hip, which would require immediate intervention and corrective procedures. So now the recent recommendation also includes a cranial ultrasound because more and more preterm neonates are born because of IVF conception. So what is the general recommendation and when and how to do this ultrasound screening? As a routine ultrasound screening should be done for all neonates who are less than 30 weeks and weighing 1250 grams, irrespective of the signs and symptoms. The screening ultrasound should be performed in all neonates who are less than 30 weeks at 7 to 14 days of age. If they are less than 30 weeks, then they are done at day 1 or day 3. If they are older, they can be done at 7 to 14 days. And it mandates that all neonates who are preterm should need a completion ultrasound cranium at 40 weeks or 36 weeks of post-menstrual age. This would help us to identify post-IVH ventriculomegaly, which is most often late diagnosis. So this can be easily identified by this routine screening. So these are the indications. And in preterm neonates, wherein babies who are less than 28 weeks, and this can be done on day 1, when there is a possibility of severe IVH or there is a clue for antenatal brain injury. So sometimes this can have extreme effects and the baby can turn out to be CP. So this is very important that we document a day 1 ultrasound in these babies. After other indications also include the following situations in preterm babies and term babies, wherein there may be recurrent seizures, they may be indicative of major malformations, there can be an intracranial hemorrhage, not IVH, and there is also an unexplained congestive cardiac failure where we can rule out a vein of canal malformation. So finally, we have completed what is recommended. So as we all know, the NRHM and RBSK operational guidelines have come into effect and they're going on with their screening and study, and still we need to have a proper guided identified group of disorders to be screened in every state, as India is a vast state and there are a lot of regional differences in the type of disorders. So what tallies for our talk today is probably defects that have been identified at birth, which include these groups. Herein they basically target only the defects that are identified by phenotype: neural tube defects, Down syndrome, cleft palate, DDH, congenital cataract, and congenital heart diseases, and ROP of puberty. Once they are identified, the newborn neonates are actually taken care of by the facilitators, ASHA workers, who make sure that they do the home visits till 6 weeks of age and identify if missed earlier also. So this is a community-oriented program to help us to identify these defects which can be identified and treated earlier. So I complete this newborn screening talk. What I would like to say is probably what we need to know is mandatory newborn screening includes hearing, universal eye screen, and a screen for CH, and G6PD deficiency. There is a definite need to analyze the prevalence of newer emerging diseases, including galactosemia, hemoglobinopathies, and cystic fibrosis in India as they are emerging. And critical congenital heart disease screening should also be done in all newborns, either at or prior to discharge. So as we already know, as always, prevention is better than cure. So let's go ahead and take the screening forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanati, for finishing it much earlier so that you can answer the questions that anyone has got. I think it was an excellent talk. I mean, I think I learned a lot because my neonatology knowledge is very minimal, and thanks for updating us. Very nice talk. The session is open to the other seniors and others who have any queries.
It is excellent talk, Dr. Vanati.
Thank you, sir.
Very
Thank
clear.
you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Chat box, I think only appreciations are there.
Okay.
There's one, have you encountered any social issues if test becomes positive? How should we counsel and resolve any conflicts? Dr. Thangavelu has asked.
Good evening, sir. So most often, I think the only problem happens with CH screening. So it is because it deals with ambiguous genitalia. So here we need to go in by a multidisciplinary approach. And right now, we need to definitely involve a pediatric endocrinologist as soon as we identify the issue. So probably with a multidisciplinary counseling, and I probably telling them that most of them can do good with treatment and hormonal therapy. In identification of particular genetic type will focus our therapy. The counseling is probably much easier with this newer technology, sir. But that is definitely a social taboo, and that part of the counseling is definitely initially painful, and it has to be done now with a proper documentation, also only with what I can say as qualified endocrinologists who can be taken into work into this declaring the ideal diagnosis. That is the common rule now. I think
there's one more question.
Yes.
Okay, there's one more question, Vanati. IRT for cystic fibrosis, if IRT is abnormal, should we repeat IRT or should we do sweat chloride?
So this, I was expecting this question. So for want of time, I didn't add on this protocol. So what we do here at Childress is off late, we are seeing a lot of positive IRTs. So there are also a lot of false positives and false negatives. So we have to initially identify whether we have run through this list of false negatives and false positives. And we have to ensure that the child is on a normal diet before we take this test. So once we think the clinical phenotype of this child is probably correlating with the cystic fibrosis, for example, a meconium ileus or a prolonged respiratory distress of an unexplained cause in early infancy or newborn, what we do generally is to do a fecal elastase and a chymotrypsin and a repeat IRT after 2 weeks. So if that subsequent test is positive and we have two confirmatory screening tests, two screening tests being positive, then we go ahead with the genetic panel, and before we also run through the pedigree chart. We also see for other sibling histories and other histories which can point towards this. So that is what is routinely recommended. So ideally, no knee-jerk response to a positive IRT. We have to run through the negatives and positives. And if essentially we feel they fit in, we go ahead with the second tier to confirm on screening. And then finally we confirm with the genetic test.
There are no more questions in the chat. A lot of appreciations only.
Okay, ma'am.
No, yeah. Everyone has said very nice talk, informative. PRC sir has asked something.
Yes.
Upfront in peripheral setup, all these screening tests may not be available. Any specific highly sensitive few tests which should never be missed? Can you highlight? I think the last slide, that's what you mentioned.
Yes, ma'am.
These are mandatory.
Yeah. Mandatory is now the hearing, congenital hypothyroidism, CAH, D6 should be necessarily done in any setup in Chennai or Tamil Nadu. That is the government recommendation. This and the rest of the tests are only optional. That depends on the center as well as the prevalence of the disease in population.
Yeah, but what the question was, I think whether is it available in all the small taluk hospitals, all these screening tests?
I think they have to refer, ma'am. I'm not actually aware whether they are
Okay.
available since use, but it says that we have to necessarily do. I am not aware. Probably I'm not aware.
Okay, okay. All the nursing homes are doing the resource-rich newborn screening. Is it necessary? Venkateshwari has asked.
So it is ideally not necessary. We can go ahead with the 3-tier testing. So we can just tell them that it is essential only in symptomatic neonates. This is not as I have already told, it is not a tier which is a core panel of diseases. So we can always opt for the non-essential ones. Yes.
For ROP, RBSK or NNF, which one is better?
So what we need to necessarily do is the government operational guidelines. These are no miss. There is no way that we could miss any neonate who is less than 2 kg, less than 34 weeks at a 4-week ROP. So if these neonates are going to be for a long time in the NICU, then we would like to go by NNF guidelines, which tells a weekly protocol and depending on gestation age. But this RBSK is suited for all centers, including smaller SNCUs, peripheral nursing homes, as well as the government sector. They are made easy and one sentence is given so that nobody misses a dreadful ROP. So that is for universal. It should never be missed. That is the difference between the two.
Oh. Anything else?
As far as statewide screening program, we started as a single district in Vellore, which has to be implemented throughout the state. Right now, we are making the local arrangements with the tie-up with the people and for screening. That's as far as the biochemical analysis is concerned from the National Health Mission, madam.
Okay. So, Dr. Venkatesh, anything else? Anyone else wants to add anything? Dr. P.R.C. Thangavelu, sir? I think if there's nothing else, I think it was a wonderful talk again. I think Dr. Vijay Kumar must be really proud of you, Vanati, as much as we are all proud of you as the KKCTA
Yes,
challenger.
Janani, every one of us felt that we are listening to our sons and daughters. That's what the feeling we had. So naturally we feel proud about it.
Yeah, that is what we are so proud that Vanati has done so well, and I think the continuously she maintained the same tempo, and the clarity was, and the slides were so clear. Her talk, everything that she uttered was so clear. I think
Following
Sunday
her
evening,
she also finished in time earlier.
I think you made the Sunday evening very, I mean, good for everyone.
Madam, it is because of the motivation, like good teachers like you and Dr. Thangavelu and all PRC and all, madam. And definitely that holds the key. That let me make very clear.
Yeah, it's mutual. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
I
you.
should
Thank
thank
you,
all.
Anand.
Thank you for this opportunity, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Yeah. You did justice to the choice. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amal Raj. Thank you, Venkatesh.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Yeah.